America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, and welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Jordan Bruno, vice president of the Job Creators Network.
Thanks for sitting in with us today, Jordan. You can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. Today, we're joined by Georgia State Representative Mesha Mainor. Mesha was first elected to the Georgia House of Representatives in 2020 and currently represents the citizens of House District 56 in the heart of Atlanta. In 2023, Representative Mainor made history by becoming the first Black woman to serve in the Georgia General Assembly as a Republican when she left the Democratic Party over her support of school choice, law and order, and the protection of conservative Georgia values. Representative Mainor, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
Thank you so much. It seems unusual to hear my name in the sentence of the first. So just surprising to know that it takes so long for such, you would think, simple things to take place. But I'm happy to be the first Black woman Republican in the Georgia General Assembly, and thank you for having me.
Well, I think you're one of the most courageous people I've met in a long time. And sometimes we don't see a lot of that in Washington, a lot of courage. So I'm glad to see it's alive and well here in Georgia. And the things that you're standing up for are things that should bring people together. School choice, our children, the things that we saw happen during COVID with our kids have been devastating in states across the country. And that's important. But you were part of the big win last week in Georgia with SB 233, which has been a long, hard-fought battle on school choice here in Georgia. Tell us about the big win. Tell us what it means for students across the state of Georgia.
I am so happy about S233, and let's not go any further without giving all due props to Senator Greg Dolezal. This was his baby that he started, and we perfected it on the House side. It does so much. I like to tell people it's called the Georgia Promise Scholarship because it does just that. Originally, the Promise Scholarship gives a small portion of state funds, $6,500, for families to make some decisions that is best for their child. The local funding still stays there. That is a misconception that a lot of families or opponents of the bill have. They feel like the Georgia Promise Scholarship takes all funding for the school with the child. That's not true. And I'd like to go into that a little bit further later to give an actual example of an Atlanta public school student, what that would look like. But the bill also now, it provides a tax incentive or a tax credit for schools. So if a student does participate in the Georgia Promise Scholarship, the school now qualifies for this tax credit. The other thing it does, there's funding in the bill for SB 233 that allows schools to expand their pre-K programs with capital budget financing in there. It also allows district transfer. So if a child lives within, say, Atlanta Public Schools right now, they can petition to go to another school within Atlanta Public Schools. But now with the interdistrict transfers, if a family member or a parent guardian is zoned for Atlanta Public Schools, but let's say they live in Forsyth County. They go to work in Forsyth County. Now SB 233 allows the parent to petition Forsyth County schools for their child to attend school there. And those are just a list of some of the things. It really is an impressive bill, and it does a lot. It also houses everything with the new authority that will maintain all of the funding and oversee the logistics of the program.
Tell us about the, you mentioned an example of a student and the funding. Go ahead and tell us about that, because this is such an important piece of legislation. We're seeing states move this type of legislation through. So glad to see Georgia did it. And I really want our listeners to understand how this helps Georgia students.
So Atlanta Public Schools, their budget is roughly about $1.5 billion. And let's put that into perspective. The state of Georgia, our reserve fund is about $3 billion. The schools in the state of Georgia, collectively, their reserve is about $6 billion. So schools have more reserve funding than the actual state of Georgia. So let's just start there. They have money. So let's go back to Atlanta Public Schools. $1.5 billion. Each student really has a price tag on their head. That price tag, for the sake of making the numbers easier, let's say it's $26,000. So each child is $26,000. The Georgia Promise Scholarship says, although I know it's $6,500, but we're going to make this easy, is $6,000. So $6,000 will leave with the child. $20,000 stays with the school. So child and family go to a location that provides much more opportunity for them. They take $6,000 only. The school, they keep the $20,000 and they have one less student. So they have a net gain in many different ways. The other thing that's worth noting, this scholarship bill is only for the bottom 25% of performing schools in the state of Georgia. There's a list out there. Many of those schools are in urban Atlanta. And so my district in particular, I have the most charter schools in my district than any other district in the state of Georgia. So families that are living in urban communities, they have a thirst for educational opportunities. They have a thirst for doing something different than traditional public education. That doesn't mean that something's wrong with traditional public education, but parents know what's best for their child.
Great. This was a huge victory, a really long fight, hard-fought fight. JCN was involved, really helping getting this over the finish line. We organized a radio ad campaign targeting House districts that were holding out. We wrote op-eds, we wrote letters, and it passed by one single vote in the House. And it just shows how these political fights really come down to just often a single vote. And this is a great example of it. Can you just give our listeners a little bit of the background of this bill and why it's been so controversial, when it seems like giving students a lifeline from failing public school is something that everyone should support?
I can't necessarily speak to it being controversial because it's not.
Right.
It's not controversial. It is providing children an opportunity, point blank, period. But I will go into a little history on why people have chosen not to support it in the past. Last year when the bill came up, there were a lot of my colleagues in rural communities that opted not to support the bill. Some of the reasoning were examples like, we don't have private schools in our communities, so this does not relate to us. Or we have great schools in our community, so this doesn't relate to us. We had someone get up from the majority party and speak on the House floor. And, he's my seatmate, love him to death, respect his opinion. And he mentioned how his wife is a former educator. And he mentioned the problems that they encountered in the school system, right? But he also mentioned he and his wife, they worked hard and they busted their butt to pay for private school education for their children. I think that piece right there, because that also is an opinion of many Democrats of it's we have the resources to send our children to these schools, but they're missing the help your neighbor piece. Everyone doesn't have the resources to get to a better place. And even though the parents, maybe they can do better, but that's not the child's fault. And so, should we really be punishing children for their environmental circumstances? And I say no.
Right. Call it school choice for me, but not for thee, I guess, that hypocrisy.
Well, what's interesting in that example is it's not costing the taxpayers any additional money. It's not like the student loan bailout where you're paying the loans of people who willingly took loans out, and now you're saying, taxpayer, you need to pay for this, and we're going to go into further debt for it. The same exact money is coming out of the Georgia taxpayers, but what's being done with the money is giving parents a choice. Do I want to stay here with my child? Am I happy? Is this a conducive environment for my child? Are they learning the best here? Or is there a better option? And that's so to me, that fairness argument doesn't work.
I'll say this also about the bill. The other opposition to it says that we don't feel like public money should go to private institutions. Another thing that people would say is private schools do not test as much as the public schools do. So I want to address both of those opinions as well. Right now we give funding, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but right now we give funding to private pre-K programs. So there are businesses that have set up and they provide a pre-K service, and the state gives those providers money. It's the same concept. And so one thing that, I think it's important, if we're going to be against something, let's be against it at all times. You're either for something or you're not. So if you are truly against public funding going to private facilities, then you need to stand up and say, we want to close all of these pre-K programs. The other piece to the testing, Georgia Promise Scholarship now has much more testing than even the public schools have now. So even with all of those additions that the Democrats wanted, they still didn't vote for it.
Is that the influence of the teacher unions? I mean, I assume they had a big presence here in fighting the bill.
They do. And interesting enough, the president of the teachers union is running for a Senate seat in Georgia. And I guess her opinion is, if the Democrats are not going to get the job done of killing educational opportunities, I am going to try to make my way into the Georgia General Assembly so I can kill it for them. One of my opponents is an Atlanta public school teacher. My question to him is, if you are against school choice, right, you're going to need to be gone so many days out of the year to be a legislator, which means there's going to be a substitute teacher there. And let's say that that's going to be about 30,000 total when you include January through April, plus the time during off season to work for your constituents, to research the legislation, to get legislation ready. Are you willing to give 30,000 of your salary back to the school so you're not taking away from the school system, since you don't want people to have the $6,500?
That's a great question to ask. So you took this stand for your constituents. And like I said, you're one of the most courageous people I've met in a long time, and not just going along with sort of the party line and looking at what your constituents needed in your district. And it meant you leaving the Democratic Party. What's been the response of the Democratic Party in Georgia, and what's been the response of the Republican Party in Georgia?
So going into the General Assembly, you don't know what to expect. I knew I was coming to represent my community. I did not know, and shame on me for not knowing that you're not supposed to vote for your district. You're supposed to vote for the party, what the party's priorities are. But I campaigned on Republican issues, not knowing that, right? So I campaigned on we're not going to defund the police. I campaigned on educational freedom. I campaigned on conservative values, empowering families. And my constituents voted for me twice without a runoff on those values. So the very first bill was a special needs scholarship bill. I voted no on that, and that's when I first realized, okay, they're not happy with this. Then it was the defund the police bill. And so to answer your question, I immediately came in not knowing how to fall in line. I immediately received pushback, but I wanted to get things done for my community. So if I was getting so much pushback from the Democrat Party, I needed the help of the Republican Party to push my initiatives. So from day one, within the first week, I started working with the Republicans. Josh Gullett, Representative Josh Gullett, he did a prosecuting oversight bill. I have a stalker. Fonnie Willis was the prosecutor. I was completely not satisfied with how she did the case because she was working with the county commissioner, who was my stalker's attorney. So I was in favor of the prosecutor oversight before all the Donald Trump stuff came up. And so I went to a Republican and I said, hey, I want to work with you on this. So what is the difference? There is no difference because I've been working with Republicans from the very beginning. I've been supporting my community that happened to be Republican values since the very beginning. So the only difference truly is I have less stress. I don't have the headache of always disappointing a party.
In advance of this interview, I just looked on the federal data to see the reading and math proficiency rates in Georgia. And the latest federal data shows 21% of Black students are proficient in reading in Georgia and 23% of Hispanic students. You've written before that number drops as low as the low single digits in your district. Can you give us a sense of how that low reading proficiency and low just basic skills learning really hamstrings your constituents' ability to learn the skills they need to live the American dream?
Yes. So if only 2% or 3% of students can read and perform simple math, they're really slated, the 97 to 98%, they're slated for school to prison pipeline automatically. Assessment scores are the basis for how prisons are built. Goldman Sachs did a study that says in 10 years, 300 million jobs are going to be lost to artificial intelligence. Those are jobs from people that can't read, right? They can't perform simple math. And so now AI is able to take those jobs. And so you're leaving a community of people without options. And people without options at times do very desperate things. So my goal with the Georgia Promise Scholarship is to break this cycle of poverty. You guys do so many great things in the workforce development space and workforce training space. If we do not give children the basic needs, they will not be able to survive in the world that is coming. They're not surviving in the world we have now, but they absolutely will not be able to survive in the world that is coming.
So what I love about your approach to this is that you're looking at you're going to the root cause and you're solving it at that level. You're looking for solutions at that level. We work a lot at the federal level on some of the legislation and that we see, and it seems to always be this wallpaper throw more money at it kind of solution. We see other states around the country. California, for example, is about to implement a $20 an hour minimum wage. That means, low skill jobs that ultimately can and will be replaced by AI or robotic technology are going to be having to pay $20 an hour minimum wage. Well, restaurant owners are already preparing to lay people off. Those are lost jobs. And instead of looking at the root cause of the problem, education, skills training, workforce development, and dealing with it there, the solution was, let's just raise the minimum wage on small business owners, which they never see it reduces jobs. I take my own personal stand against some of the automation, and I'm sure it doesn't really help, but it's my own personal thing. When I go into the grocery store and I see they've put up the new scan your own stuff out, I refuse to go to them because I look at them and I say, well, there's 6 of them. That's 6 jobs that aren't here at the grocery store because they're automated now, and I'm supposed to scan the stuff myself. So I go into all the cashier lines where somebody has a job and they're working.
You're right. I do the same thing at times for that very reason. I think you hit on a lot of good points. I think that if we roll back a few more steps, I did a bill about school board training. So local school boards are elected by the community. It's also one of the lowest turnout elections, the local school boards. So I thought to myself, okay, if you have a community living in blight, and this is also the community where only 2 to 3% of the children are able to read, you have someone, because there are no requirements, right, to be the local school board member of a $1.5 billion budget. So you have people coming from the community that may not know how to look at a balance sheet, may not know how to look at a $1.5 billion budget, may not know how to manage resources, think about fiscal oversight, understand the governance that must go along with this huge responsibility. So the bill said, let's train school board members electively, but let's do some accounting one-on-one. Let's make that a requirement. Let's make it a requirement that you understand the state budget and how your school budget interrelates with the state budget. That did not pass, but I think what you're getting at is the school board also determines what the curriculums are. The school board elects or appoints the superintendent. The school board really has such a large responsibility. I'm not sure if our current system in these blighted communities is the best fit, because you may have someone that may be incapable of making the type of decisions that need to be made. And I've been in meetings, community meetings, where it might be a vendor, a literacy vendor. And they say, hey, we have this program. We would love this. We've done it in this state. It does this much. The data shows for this area, you're at this percentage point, or you're at these data points. And I've heard the school board members say, how do we fix it? What do we do? I mean, they're asking questions that they should have the answers to. And if they don't have the answers to it, they should be hiring experts to come in and educate them. But I don't think they know that they can do that.
Right.
So that is why we must give parents an opportunity other ways, because the current system just is not all the way functioning in some areas.
Mesha, if we can make this conversation just a little more personal, our CEO, Alfredo Ortiz, talks a lot about how school choice helped him escape intergenerational poverty and become a success politically, small business owner, now the CEO of a major nonprofit in Washington. How about your journey and your path to becoming such a success that you are today? How did a good education and potentially school choice help you become the person you are today?
So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I had an interesting conversation with my mom this weekend. My mom is 72 years old. And we were talking about the Georgia Promise Scholarship and giving people opportunities. Um, she went to Turner High School, which is a famous Black high school back in the 70s and 60s and 50s for African Americans that produced greats like Charlene Hunter Galt, who desegregated UGA, the first Black woman to desegregate UGA, Hamilton Holmes, and so forth. They do a scholarship event every year. And so this weekend was the Turner High Alumni Scholarship Breakfast. And I was speaking to some of the students, and I was telling some of the parents about the new Promise Scholarship in case they have other children, because they brought their children that are graduating this year. And so some of the parents said, "Oh yeah, I heard about that. I can't wait. I'm going to spread the news. This is, so exciting. I'm so glad this passed." So when we got back to my mom's house, I was talking to her, and she said, this is a personal piece. She's like, when I used to come home, when I got off of the bus, I would go to the dining room table and I would just lay out all of my things. And I was so happy to do all of my homework, right? I was really the same way. I did homework. I was ahead of the class because I went to my teacher and I would say, I'm finished with this. I want to do more. So you do need a child sometimes that is going to be proactive in wanting to learn. You also are going to need a home environment where the family is encouraging you to learn. They value education. The other personal side to the story for me is the area that I grew up in, where my mom still lives. It was called the Bluff. I did not know I lived in an area, quote unquote, called the Bluff, which is known to have a high propensity for the time for pimping, for drugs, tons of illicit behavior. I did not know that was my community because my mom sent me to a school in another district. We used someone else's address. So I had a different set of friends. I used to ride the public transportation to school, so that was MARTA. I did not get off of a school bus. I got off at a public transportation bus stop because the school bus actually would take a group of students to the public transportation rail station. And I tell people I would get off of the bus and run home because there were crackheads. There was a liquor store across the street. It was just full of men that were drunk, just hanging out at the corner store. So that is the Georgia Promise Scholarship. It is personal to me because if I was a child at this moment, my mom would jump at the opportunity to have $6,500 to take me out of that environment. Right now, parents are going to jail for using someone else's address, trying to get their child in a different environment.
Wow, that's a really powerful story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, definitely. I hope that your constituents know how courageous you are and know how much you're fighting for them. Tell us about your reelection campaign. How are things going? Where can people go to support your campaign?
Thank you for that. The election campaign is going great. Actually, I'm getting wonderful feedback from the community. We had a group at the Capitol yesterday. It wasn't my group. I wasn't a part of it. It was the Georgia Masons and the women that are a part of the Masonry. And a couple men came over to me. I was just walking by and they said, Representative Mainor. And I was like, yes. And they said, we just want you to know that we support you and you have a lot of people that are rooting for you and supporting you. So the campaign is going well. People can't be vocal because of the way society is right now. And that's fine, because I don't need you to publicly support me at the ballot box. And you can support me on my website, which is MeshaMainor.com. All of my social media sites are pretty much Mesha Mainor, except for Facebook is Mesha for Georgia, and that's FOR, Mesha for Georgia.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and talking about yourself, your personal story, and obviously how it relates to the fight that you've taken on in Georgia, and the courage that you've shown. I think that you are an example for a lot of people in this country, certainly in politics, to follow. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
And thank you all for listening on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. Main Street Matters is distributed by Salem Network. You can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com, and we'll see you next time.